Maybe to talk a bit and to touch a bit the crisis which is happening between Serbia and Kosovo, how can you maybe elaborate a bit more about this? What is happening from the Kosovo perspective, since you're from Pristina?
This was expected. When the agreement on IDs actually took place in August, it was clearly because the EU was afraid of deadlines. So basically, they came up with something which was recycled from 2011 or 12, and they just heralded it as a new breakthrough between Pristina and Belgrade, and really showing that sort of leaving us to believe that by the end of the year there will be something. And of course, you know, then there was something going on because of the war in Ukraine. There was this French-German alignment. There was this proposal being discussed, and then the US was backing up the European counterparts to actually close that security gap, soft spot that is in the Western Balkans, of course, in addition to Bosnia. But for Serbia and Kosovo, this was, you know, a momentum to actually reach a breakthrough. The problem is that back in summer, I actually foresaw the upcoming problems, which is of course energy and the association, which was the elephant in the room. And it was clearly something that the government has been the government of Kosovo has been chased, not only by Serbia, but also by EU and US to implement it. And then, of course, we reached yet another deadline, which looks technical in principle, because it's about, you know, car registration plates. I mean, many European counterparts wouldn't even understand why so much fuss over just car registration plates. But it's more than that. It's not technical. It's basically a government of Kosovo trying to reposition itself in the dialogue. Obviously, when Kurti came, dialogue was, you know, in a very, especially Kosovo was in a very bad position. And for Kurti coming to power, basically saying no to the association, to the Brussels Agreement, but specifically the association, it looks like his aim was to actually just go back to zero and then start renegotiating on his terms. But whether we have time to actually do that, because obviously we are having new elections in the US, and we don't know how the EU will look like, you know, with the war in Ukraine that is ongoing, and this winter, of course, being a devastating one for Europe. Then I don't know if he personally has the time, and the international community, in this case the EU, would actually admit to restarting a process just because Kosovo has changed leadership in the process.
Maybe also to elaborate a bit about the visa liberalization, because the recent polls show that in Kosovo there is about 92 or 93% of population who is really supporting the EU integration of Kosovo and looks towards an EU membership of Kosovo. So how does it backfire that Kosovo still hasn't got the visa liberalization, and one can even not expect it in the near future? I'm talking about probably the next year. There will be no changes to
exactly
that.
And even about next year is still a big question mark, because the Czech proposal did not go through, because Spain and other member states actually opposed it or had issues with the proposal. So even, you know, the hope that the political decision would be taken this year, but then the implementation will start with ETIAS in 2023, November, December, it's still not really sure. So, I mean, this is of course devastating for Kosovo citizens. First of all, I mean, we are the only country outside of the white list, and I mean, people from Taiwan, which is territory, so it's not a state-to-state issue, can travel visa-free to Europe, also from Colombia. So it's not that either rule of law or being like the stated issue. It's just like the matter really, we missed the train when we actually failed to be grouped with Georgia and Ukraine. And now it's just, you know, it's a matter of member states, particularly France. And obviously from the EU side, they just want to have this leverage, which is let's keep something on our hands which we can use to trade off with Kosovo, especially in the dialogue or in other issues in which Kosovo is expected to compromise, because we're not in the EU integration process, so we don't have any other, you know, like the EU does not have any other mechanism to actually make pressure on Kosovo. And from Kosovo, this is like devastating, because the new government really had this approach, proactive approach towards France bilaterally, to really convince that, you know, if you had been in a way in doubt about rule of law, fighting corruption, then we will definitely work bilaterally with you to address that. There is a huge disappointment, and the people in Kosovo have given up. We're not celebrating anymore, because back then we used to celebrate every positive step or every positive statement coming from the EU, and now this is not happening, and we just sort of learn to live with isolation, which is a shame.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to also talk a bit about this visit to Brussels that we had right now. We met with several MEPs who are really working from the European Parliament, who are working on Western Balkans, who are trying to integrate the Western Balkans even faster to the EU, and they all say that Western Balkans is now a top priority and that it should be a integral part of the EU. So how do you comment on this approach in regards to the actual happenings on the ground, which is really slow?
It depends on who you meet, Luca, because if you meet the parliamentarians, especially the MEPs who are actually covering, because we did not meet those who actually probably don't even know basics about Western Balkans. We met those who actually report, because I mean that's our counterparts and focal points here. So of course, according to them, I mean, it's a topic that they have dedicated their work, their careers, and they really want to make a breakthrough. And in my opinion, Parliament is probably the easiest institution, EU institution to work with, because you find people who are actually like down the ground. They visit the region very often. They have their own networks, and they really know what they're pushing for. But then, you know, like if you talk to the Parliament, because Parliament has endorsed visa liberalization for Kosovo, they constantly have even joint statements and declaration to actually push the member states or call member states to push forward with visas, and the accession negotiations back then for North Macedonia and Albania, and now the candidate status for Bosnia. So basically you see them that they are really down to earth, and we are really close to the citizens in the region. But then, you know, it gets more complicated when you know, there is a level of commission, and it's get like ultra difficult when it comes to the council, where where member states, you know, have their veto and the vote, and they really, you know, it's that level is really difficult to pass. So I'm very hopeful and positive to see that at least, you know, during this, you know, study visit, you know, the meetings with MEPs, but also with think tanks, you still see that there are people and institutions that still care about the Balkans. They are trying to prioritize it, especially after the war in Ukraine. But then it's all, you know, statements which it is very difficult to actually transform into tangible results and actions, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also last but not least, I will a bit touch upon the loss of trust. So basically many people from the region are experiencing this loss of trust when it comes to the EU and the actions of EU which contributed to the loss of trust. But nobody talks about the loss of trust which the EU experienced from the region and from the several states which are in the region. So maybe also to touch upon this a bit. So how can the politicians and the leaders of the region better communicating to cooperate to regain this trust again from the EU?
First of all, like for political elites in the Balkans, it's really convenient for us to actually target the EU and criticize the EU, because they want us, you know, authoritarian leaders, they want us to criticize the EU and build this anti-EU sort of sentiment in our countries, because I mean, obviously they didn't work for EU integration, and it provides no leverage to them by becoming part of it, and obviously this is because of their political actions within the countries. In the past events that I've been invited, I've been speaking, it is like this trend of just criticizing the EU, because for us we had already unfortunately lost trust in our governments. So in general, like, we sort of lost this hope that this need for reforms will come internally. So we constantly ask for external actors, in this case the EU, to actually bring it to the Balkans, which is, you know, like kind of difficult. And then of course then there is this EU fatigue, basically. In my previous talk with Dusan Relic, he really, you know, pointed out one important sentence, which was like, Balkans is a diplomatic cemetery for like EU top diplomats and coming from member states. So basically, it has been so difficult to actually make a breakthrough. There is so much loss in trust that the EU can deliver in the Balkans, and something positive will happen. That even top diplomats and people who actually worked in the member states on the Western Balkans have sort of given up. It's been 20 years trying to push for an agenda, which of course, the blame is shared between the EU and the political elites in the Balkans. But with the war in Ukraine, we really have no time to lose. So as I said in our meeting, it is now the right time for us to actually work on both ways, to come here, continue our advocacy in Brussels and member states, because it's super important, but also to go back to our governments, to go back to our citizens and try to really increase demand for democracy internally in order to make governments a trusted partners of EU. Otherwise, if we continue this way, hoping that it will come externally, I'm afraid it won't happen anytime soon.